The Third Legion had once marched across the stars with a quiet confidence, a certainty carved into the foundation of their every action. Their reputation preceded them into every war zone. Commanders spoke their name with an air of expectation, while enemies whispered it as if invoking a standard none could meet. They were the Emperor's children, his chosen sons. The Legion granted the impossible distinction of bearing the personal heraldry of the Master of Mankind. To many, that accolade was a badge of honor. To the warriors who carried it, it became something far heavier. Among them served one whose life had been shaped by the relentless rhythm of expectation. He had risen through discipline, through refinement, through an ironclad resolve that brooked no compromise. His path had been carved not by ferocity or blind devotion, but by the steadfast application of self-scrutiny. Every strike he had ever delivered, every maneuver he had ever enacted, had been measured against an unforgiving internal scale. Perfection was not an aspiration, it was the threshold below which failure began. From his earliest indoctrination, he had understood the ethos of the Legion. Others trained to kill swiftly, to conquer worlds in the Emperor's name. The Third Legion trained to do so flawlessly. Each movement, each breath, each calculated extension of one's will on the battlefield served the greater ideal of refinement. That doctrine seeped into everything the Legion touched. Even in the solitude of their practice halls, warriors repeated maneuvers long after mastery had been achieved. Precision was not a means, it was the identity of the Sons of the Phoenix. His earliest memories of life among them existed in sharp contrast to the wars they waged later. Back then, before the weight of expectation grew too dense to stand beneath, the Legion had felt unified in purpose. There was a shared pride, a recognition of potential, rather than a condemnation of anything less than flawless execution. He remembered instructors who corrected with calm confidence, brothers who encouraged one another, leadership that seemed both demanding and reassuring. In those days, the pursuit of perfection had felt like a noble climb, but even then, the seed of something harsher lay dormant. The Legion's training cycles intensified as their reputation grew. The praise lavished upon them by imperial commanders elevated standards, until the line between excellence and inadequacy blurred. If other legions needed victory, the Emperor's children needed victory conducted in a manner worthy of their title. The expectation permeated every routine. Armor maintenance became ritual. Physical conditioning became obsession. Tactical simulations became exercises in absolute precision. The Legion still appeared united, still carried themselves with regal poise, but the weight pressing on every warrior grew silently. What began as ambition turned to quiet dread. Failure, even theoretical failure, became an unacceptable outcome. He remembered moments when a brother faltered in drills no more than a fraction of a second behind the ideal rhythm, and the room's temperature seemed to change. Instructors paused. Observers took note. The offender corrected himself with mechanical urgency. Nothing was said, nothing needed to be. The unspoken judgment was more punishing than reprimand. Every warrior felt it, and though none voiced it, every warrior feared becoming the one who drew that silence. Through these subtle shifts, something within the Third Legion changed. Perfection ceased to be a shared journey. It became a looming specter that watched over them, whispering that anything short of absolute refinement was shame. And yet, despite the pressure, the Legion excelled. They excelled because they had no choice. Years passed in this manner, with victory after victory etched into the annals of imperial conquest. In every engagement, the Third Legion fought not merely to win, but to demonstrate the superiority of their art. Other legions fought with fury, with faith, with tactical brilliance, but none pursued the clean, deliberate execution of the Emperor's children. Their commander lauded them. Imperial courts celebrated them. Word of their discipline spread, and underneath the praise, the weight grew even heavier. He remembered the turning point not as a single moment, but as a cumulative pressure that had built over so many campaigns. The Legion's insistence on flawlessness had begun to erode its warriors from within. Rest cycles shortened as individuals began privately correcting perceived imperfections. Rivalries formed in training halls, silent competitions to see who could maintain the most impeccable standard. The camaraderie of earlier years faded into a tension that was masked by ceremonial grace. To outsiders, the Third Legion remained paragons of elegance and lethal precision, but internally, cracks formed within the polished facade. Those who stumbled mentally noted how quickly small mistakes spread whispers of inadequacy. The Legion did not cast out the imperfect. They feared creating imperfection more than anything, but they marked it. It lingered over the individual like a shadow, pushing them into cycles of self-punishment and obsessive repetition. He knew these patterns intimately. He lived through them. Every day began with ritualized perfectionism, testing the calibration of fingertips against blade edges, rehearsing the exact timing for reloading drills, reviewing personal combat records for microsecond deviations. He had once believed he pursued these routines out of pride. Only later would he realize they had begun ruling him. This internal straining grew heavier with every campaign, especially as the Legion expanded its ranks. Reinforcements added fresh faces, aspirants, naive to the crushing weight of the Emperor's children legacy. Many struggled, some broke, none dared admit it. Even those who faltered the most wore masks of serene discipline, hiding their weariness behind polished armor and elegant posture. The Legion's culture left no space for vulnerability. As accolades grew, so too did the intangible pressure. Imperial officers frequently remarked on the Legion's precision in their reports. The Mechanicum praised their exacting approach to maintaining war gear. Civilians referred to them as flawless artificers of war. The expectations piled higher. Fulfillment became impossible. He observed how the Legion's pride slowly twisted. What once felt honorable began to feel compulsory. The pursuit of perfection was no longer a passion. It became a survival strategy. Even the most gifted warriors felt breathless beneath the weight. And then came the longing unspoken, unacknowledged for something beyond perfection. If perfection remained forever out of reach, perhaps something existed above it, something transcendent, something that would finally end the endless climb. The first hints of this desire manifested in small ways. Warriors pushed themselves past human and transhuman limits, seeking enhancements not for battle necessity, but for the promise of reaching a purer form of excellence. Apothecaries began receiving requests for adjustments that bordered on obsession. Training masters noticed warriors pushing until physical collapse, yet none intervened. To do so would be to admit that the Legion's expectations were unreasonable. The truth was that none among the Emperor's children could admit such a thing. If they acknowledged the suffocating burden they lived under, their entire identity would fracture. So they continued, pretending the pursuit still inspired them, while it quietly consumed them. He often recalled watching his brothers after campaigns, polished armor still glowing from battlefield residue, posture regal, but eyes subtly hollow. The moment the last observer left, shoulders would sag ever so slightly, breaths would deepen, muscles would tremble beneath ceramite plates. And yet, before the next mission briefing, they would appear pristine again, hiding the deterioration. He saw the Legion's changing psychology through the lens of personal experience. His life became a sequence of evaluations, self-inflicted examinations of every motion. He found himself counting errors in others as much as he scrutinized his own. It was not arrogance, it was reflex. Imperfection drew attention because it threatened the image he had constructed of himself as a warrior worthy of bearing the Emperor's symbol. And deep inside, he feared the day he might falter. The worst part was that no one spoke of these burdens. The silence was part of the culture. The Third Legion could not admit weakness. They were proof that humanity could rise above limitations. To say otherwise would be to betray everything they had built. He did not realize how fragile this foundation was until the first signs of collapse emerged. Even then, he dismissed them. A brother lingering too long over a weapon calibration, another losing himself in the rhythm of practice drills until his motions bordered on trance, a third repeating a maneuver dozens of times after achieving mastery, as if searching for something beyond correctness. These behaviors seemed strange, but understandable. They were symptoms of an invisible illness spreading quietly through the Legion, a creeping hunger for something more than perfection. He could not yet name it. None of them could. But the Legion was changing. The pride that once defined them had begun twisting into something sharper, something that cut inward as much as it projected outward. And though no one dared say it aloud, the Third Legion was beginning to show signs of a desire that extended far beyond discipline or excellence. They wanted release from the endless ascendancy. They wanted transcendence. Something on the horizon waited for them, something that would offer that release at an unspeakable cost. And, though he did not yet know its name, he could feel the first vibrations of its presence in the hidden corners of his thoughts. A resonance, a whisper, a promise of perfection transformed. It had begun long before any of them realized. The arrival of the Primarch changed the Third Legion in ways no warrior had anticipated. For years, they had fought under a mantle of expectation that exceeded the limits of flesh and ceramite, carrying a name that did not belong wholly to them. They bore the symbol of the Emperor himself, without the presence of their gene father to anchor that burden. In the absence of Fulgrim, the Legion had become a sculpture carved by duty rather than vision, shaped by the hands of commanders who could only guess at what perfection meant to the one who embodied it. When Fulgrim was discovered, the effect rippled through the Legion like a controlled detonation, silent on the surface, devastating beneath. Many legions reacted to their primarchs with pride or awe. The Emperor's children reacted with something far more complex. For the first time, they saw the living embodiment of the ideal they had been conditioned to serve. Fulgrim's presence did not simply inspire, it redefined the very scale on which they measured themselves. From the moment he joined them, the Third Legion felt the standard shift. Their Primarch possessed a grace and command that eclipsed the most accomplished of their warriors. Nothing in his bearing hinted at effort. He seemed carved from intent itself. Where others impressed through force of will or tactical brilliance, Fulgrim's influence manifested as a constant reminder that perfection was not a goal, but a state that could be embodied. His very existence became a mirror in which the Legion examined their inadequacies. The protagonist, still young by Astartes standards, but already shaped by discipline, found himself watching Fulgrim with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. Fulgrim moved through the ranks like a surgeon, placing precise incisions, cutting out inefficiency with effortless judgment. His gaze saw everything: the faulty angle of a warrior's stance, the microscopic delay in a technique, the tiny hesitation before a strike. He never chastened loudly. He did not need to. Warriors corrected themselves before he spoke. This silent correction became one of the earliest signals that something fundamental had changed. The Legion had always feared failure, but now the fear crystallized into something sharper. To stand in Fulgrim's presence was to stand before perfection given form, and in that presence, the realization settled. They would never reach his level. No Astartes could. But still, they would try. They had no other purpose. Fulgrim did not sit atop the Legion like a distant idol. He actively reshaped them. Every training cycle intensified, not through cruelty, but through escalating expectation. He introduced refinements to their doctrines, demanded cleaner formations, smoother transitions, more elegant efficiency. The Legion, starved for direction, absorbed these new demands with hungry devotion. Fulgrim's word became the measure by which every brother judged himself. Under his guidance, drills extended into what once would have been rest periods. Warriors stayed awake longer than their circadian rhythms recommended. They studied combat recordings until they could recount motions frame by frame. Every flaw became an affront, not only to their own pride, but to the perfection their Primarch embodied. The protagonist sometimes observed his brothers staring at Fulgrim with something beyond respect, a yearning, as if simply standing near him might somehow elevate them. Some warriors grew quieter, some harsher, some more intense. Their discipline did not falter, but the nature of it changed. The Primarch had not intended to instill fear, he had offered inspiration. Yet in the minds of the Emperor's children, inspiration quickly calcified into obsession. He felt it too. The desire to be seen by Fulgrim as worthy consumed his internal rhythm. He found himself repeating maneuvers long after exhaustion set in, driven not by the need to improve but by the need to meet a standard more absolute than any he had known. The idea that Fulgrim might someday look upon him and see imperfection gnawed at him in ways combat never had. Fulgrim introduced artistic disciplines to their routines: painting, sculpting, music, forms of expression meant to broaden their understanding of beauty and enhance their appreciation of perfection. Many embraced these practices eagerly, discovering in them a means to refine their inner harmony. The protagonist took to them with conflicted intent. He found no joy in creating beauty for its own sake, yet he studied each art with meticulous diligence, fearful of being the one who failed to match the aesthetic ideals Fulgrim valued. Some warriors revealed unexpected talents. Others forced themselves through exercises with grim determination. The Legion's identity shifted. They were no longer simply elite soldiers, they became connoisseurs of elegance in war and in thought. Fulgrim believed beauty strengthened them. In theory, he was right. But the Legion never approached beauty with moderation. They approached it as they approached everything else: a target to master, a standard to surpass, a domain in which failure was shame. Fulgrim fostered unity through shared ambition, but inadvertently deepened the fractures within individual warriors. Each man became a critic of his own soul, measuring grace with the same ruthlessness he measured lethality. Under Fulgrim's vision, the Legion became more refined, more efficient, more breathtaking on the battlefield, and more fragile beneath the surface. The protagonist witnessed this fragility in moments when armor plates muffled strained breaths, when hands trembled imperceptibly after failed attempts to exceed the prior day's standards, when eyes lingered too long on Fulgrim's movements, searching for something they could emulate but would never attain. Perfect soldiers shaped by a perfect father, yet condemned to always stand below his height. Campaigns under Fulgrim began with the kind of precision Imperial tacticians studied for decades. The Emperor's children executed maneuvers that bordered on choreographed art, sweeping through enemy lines with synchronized grace. Reports praised their flawless execution. Other legions acknowledged their prowess. Fulgrim accepted these praises with serene satisfaction, as if receiving nothing more than what had always been owed. Such victories intoxicated the Third Legion. They became addicted not to triumph, but to the validation of flawless performance. Each campaign raised the bar further. Each success made the next feel like an opportunity for failure, rather than achievement. But beneath the pride lay something darker: the realization that perfection provided diminishing returns. No matter how impeccable their execution, Fulgrim always saw a way to refine it further. He would praise them, then point out a slight improvement that could have been achieved. Never cruelly, always softly, but the message embedded itself deeply: their perfection was not perfect enough. The protagonist once believed discipline aligned him with Fulgrim's ideals. Yet the more he watched his Primarch, the more he recognized the distance between them. Fulgrim seemed weightless, untouched by the internal burdens the Legion carried. His pursuit of perfection was joyous, almost effortless. He saw beauty in everything, even flaws. The Legion saw only targets. Fulgrim's optimism stood in stark contrast to the tightening anxiety within his sons. He wanted them to find inspiration in beauty. Instead, many felt judged by it. They admired him profoundly, but admiration carried edges sharper than blades. During one campaign, the Legion faced an enemy force that resisted far longer than intelligence reports had predicted. The prolonged engagement introduced minor inefficiencies, nothing that impacted victory, but enough to interrupt the fluidity Fulgrim demanded. Afterward, Fulgrim reviewed their actions with calm clarity, pointing out several moments where greater precision could have been achieved. He expressed appreciation for their discipline, but the praise could not erase the weight of his observations. That night, the protagonist saw several warriors repeating small corrections, adjusting angles of movement by degrees, invisible to anyone but themselves. They worked in silence, driven not by the need to improve, but by the need to erase the sense of having disappointed their Primarch. It was then he realized how deep the Legion's devotion had sunk. Fulgrim had not chastised them, he had simply expected more. And the Legion had internalized this expectation so thoroughly that even success tasted like partial failure. These patterns deepened with every campaign. Whatever exhilaration Fulgrim intended through shared artistic endeavors often inflamed rivalries instead. Warriors compared their skill in painting or sculpting with the same severity they applied to battlefield metrics. Some excelled naturally, drawing admiration. Others forced themselves into creative practices that never resonated with them. For those who struggled, the shame was identical to martial imperfection. The protagonist participated as required, studying aesthetics with the same tireless rigor he applied to combat. He could sculpt with precision but no passion. He could paint with technique but no inspiration. His works were technically sound yet empty. He recognized this flaw and despised it. He feared Fulgrim might notice someday. The fear drove him deeper into obsessive refinement. Yet the more he refined, the less meaning he found. Art became another arena where perfection slipped just out of reach. He wondered whether others felt the same emptiness. If they did, they concealed it as expertly as he concealed his own. Fulgrim's influence intensified when he began taking personal interest in individual warriors. His guidance was flawless, his insight near divine, yet his presence sharpened their internal tension. To be chosen for his attention was an honor. To disappoint him was unthinkable. The protagonist observed how those closest to Fulgrim thrived externally, while their private discipline became more severe. They trained longer, practiced harder, scrutinized themselves ruthlessly. Fulgrim encouraged growth. They turned it into self-punishment. The Legion's victories became more elaborate, more theatrical, more flawless. But with each triumph, a thin vibration of dissonance grew subtle, almost imperceptible, but present. Something in the foundation of the Legion's identity strained beneath the unspoken pressure. Fulgrim, in his radiant pursuit of beauty, did not see it. The protagonist felt it most strongly in moments of silence after battle, when the echo of victory faded and the restless urgency to refine returned. There was no rest, no satisfaction, only the next improvement to chase, the next correction to make. Perfection had become an unattainable horizon, and the Legion was sprinting toward it endlessly. What none of them recognized was how close this path brought them to collapse. Fulgrim's standard had not merely elevated them, it had set them on an incline so steep that no warrior, no matter how gifted, could maintain footing forever. They ascended still, believing themselves rising towards something transcendent without realizing the thinness of the ledge beneath their feet. It was only a matter of time before someone slipped. Only a matter of time before the Legion realized that perfection, when defined by a being like Fulgrim, could become a poison masked as inspiration. They continued upward, unaware of the fall that awaited them. The flaw revealed itself long before any warrior dared acknowledge it. It began as a subtle resonance, a faint disturbance woven through the harmony Fulgrim had crafted within the Legion. In earlier years, the Third Legion corrected errors with calm precision, responding to imperfection as artisans refining their craft. But under the gaze of their Primarch, the meaning of error changed. The smallest misalignment became a reminder of inadequacy. A lapse in timing felt like a personal failing, rather than an incidental disruption of battle's chaotic rhythm. The protagonist noticed this shift during a campaign that should have posed no real challenge to the Legion. The enemy force was resistant but unremarkable, hardly capable of threatening transhuman warriors, trained to embody precision. The objective was straightforward. The strategy was sound, yet in the midst of the operation, a maneuver executed by one of the Third's elite cohorts deviated by less than a breath. It was a momentary misstep, corrected instantly, but the imperfect motion lingered in the minds of those who witnessed it. Fulgrim reviewed the performance afterward. His composure remained serene, his critique measured, but something in his expression unsettled the Legion. The Primarch's standard was absolute, a vertical ascent without plateau. Even Fulgrim's most gentle observation held the weight of divine expectation. When he identified the flaw, it was with a surgeon's clarity, not anger but disappointment, so subtle it pierced like a blade refined past the point of visibility. The warrior responsible stood motionless as Fulgrim spoke. He absorbed every word with the posture of a statue meant to convey elegance but marred by the tension of contained shame. The Primarch praised the formation's overall execution, yet the flaw hovered between them, small, almost trivial, but poisonous in its implications. The moment became an echo that resonated through the Legion. The protagonist watched the warrior afterward, noting how he threw himself into solitary drills with a ferocity disguised as discipline. He repeated the maneuver dozens of times, adjusting his angle, recalibrating his balance, pushing past the rhythm of efficiency into something rigid and unnatural. He was no longer attempting to improve, he was atoning. Others noticed it as well. The silent fraternity of Astartes, normally composed of reserved appraisal, became more cautious, more hesitant. They observed one another with sharpened scrutiny. Every movement risked becoming a flaw. The pursuit of perfection no longer felt like a path of ascension, but a minefield where the slightest misstep could detonate into disgrace. The protagonist felt the tension press against the edges of his own discipline. Fulgrim inspired in ways no other being could, but inspiration alone did not sustain the endless climb the Legion had undertaken. He found himself rehearsing forms beyond exhaustion, not to meet Fulgrim's standard, but to avoid falling short of it. In those hours of relentless repetition, he recognized a pattern taking root in the hearts of his brothers. Their focus turned inward, sharpening into self-critique that bordered on obsession. He observed warriors calibrating their weapons with delicate movements, bordering on ritualistic compulsion. He saw others rewriting tactical notations with microscopic precision, as if redrawing a symbol could erase the memory of a flawed maneuver. A few isolated themselves entirely, seeking solitude to battle imperfections only they perceived. As these reactions spread, the protagonist began noticing another, more disturbing pattern. When Fulgrim praised a warrior, the commendation brought temporary elevation, a weightless surge of pride, but the effect did not last. Fulgrim's praise held the same danger as his critique. It reminded them that perfection was possible if only for him. They aimed to reach him, but the higher they reached, the further away he seemed. The disparity between aspiration and reality widened, and frustration took root beneath pride. The flaw revealed itself again during another campaign, one remembered not for its outcome, but for its aftermath. The enemy proved erratic, forcing the Legion to adapt quickly. They won decisively, but the operation lacked the grace Fulgrim valued. The Third Legion executed their orders flawlessly by any measure except their own. They achieved victory, but the rhythm of their advance felt uneven. Fulgrim reviewed their performance as before, offering analytical clarity, yet the tone of his evaluation sharpened the internal dissonance the Legion had been unable to voice. The protagonist felt the shift the moment he removed his helm after the engagement. Among the warriors stood an unspoken acknowledgement that something had gone wrong, not strategically, not tactically, but spiritually. They sensed the fracture even if it remained invisible. Their error was not failing to defeat the enemy. It was failing to defeat them beautifully. This realization unsettled them more than any battlefield wound. Fulgrim encouraged refinement, not rigidity, but the Legion internalized his vision with a fervor so absolute that it left no room for humanity or pragmatism. Their Primarch lived perfection effortlessly, yet they suffered under the relentless demand to emulate him. What they saw as inspiration, they twisted into torment. They pushed themselves to reach a height no transhuman could achieve, not understanding that Fulgrim never intended them to mirror him completely. They were meant to grow under his guidance, not collapse beneath it. But collapse they did, slowly, quietly, with the elegance of a structure weakening at its foundations, while still appearing pristine from afar. the protagonist began noticing fractures in discipline that manifested not as rebellion but as fixation. Brothers who once corrected their errors calmly began exhibiting frustration when a technique failed to meet an invisible standard. Warriors known for composure reacted sharply to undisguised flaws. Some masked their anxiety behind stoic rigidity. Others buried it in endless repetition. He himself felt the weight of this shift. He found it harder to distinguish between refinement and compulsion. His body responded automatically to subtle imperfections he perceived in his own movements, driving him to correct them even when no improvement was necessary. He began waking from rest cycles with the sense that he had not restored himself, but merely paused between bursts of self-discipline. One day, while observing his brothers train, he sensed the flaw again, not in technique, but in spirit. Warriors moved with machine-like determination, their motions flawless yet devoid of vitality. Their precision lacked the beauty Fulgrim sought. It resembled a dance performed not from passion but from fear. In the quiet moments between campaigns, these symptoms grew sharper. The Legion gathered in practice halls not to strengthen themselves, but to maintain a fragile illusion that perfection was still attainable. They did not speak of their struggles. Silence became armor. Pride became a mask. Beneath both, a fracture widened. The flaw that emerged in those days was not physical. It was not a lapse of training or a tactical misstep. It was the quiet recognition that their perfection had become hollow, a shape without substance, a standard impossible to meet, a cycle without end. The flaw was not in their Primarch. It was in the weight they placed on his ideals. It was in themselves. And though none of them could yet name the nature of the unease that grew within their hearts, the Third Legion had taken its first invisible step toward a fall from which they could never return. The transition from disciplined obsession to genuine distortion began during the Lair campaign. The world itself mattered little. Its defenders fought with an alien resilience, relying on forms and patterns that seemed almost fluid. Their structures, bodies, and weapons all bore a minor yet uncanny symmetry, as if designed by minds that regarded physical laws as flexible suggestions rather than rules. To most legions, Lair would have been another world to purge. To the Emperor's children, it became a mirror that reflected the first hints of their unraveling. The protagonist entered the campaign expecting refinement. Fulgrim had emphasized the importance of elegance even in extermination, and the Third Legion responded with the same grace they brought to every battlefield. Yet the resistance they encountered was unlike anything they had expected. The Lair fought with movements that seemed to exist in two places at once. Their limbs bent in unsettling arcs, their patterns flowed like liquid thought. It was not beauty, but it possessed a kind of coherence that felt deliberate and confident. Something in that alien fluidity unsettled the Legion. Their own precision, so rigid, so disciplined, felt heavy by comparison. Warriors executed their drills flawlessly, but the Lair seemed to move without effort, as though following an instinct too deep for the Astartes to comprehend. Instead of inspiring disgust, the strange beauty awakened something dormant within the Third Legion, a hunger for grace beyond human limits. The battle that changed everything occurred deep within a structure whose architecture defied familiar geometry. The Third Legion advanced through its chambers with clinical poise, eliminating resistance with practiced efficiency, yet an underlying tension accompanied every movement. Fulgrim was present. His presence sharpened their urgency, pushing each warrior to display perfection before the one who embodied it. During the assault's final stages, Fulgrim confronted a Lair construct guarding what appeared to be a ceremonial chamber. The entity fought with a fluid grace that drew Fulgrim's fascination. Every movement it made demonstrated a freedom from restraint that no human-born warrior could mimic. It was not superior, they defeated it decisively, but its form lingered in thought. What Fulgrim saw in that moment would remain known only to him, but the Legion felt the shift immediately. When the battle ended, Fulgrim discovered the blade. It lay unguarded atop a pedestal of intertwined organic filaments, shaped not like a weapon forged, but like one grown. Its surface shimmered with iridescent tones that changed in subtle waves, reflecting patterns that seemed almost alive. To the protagonist, it appeared unsettling, too symmetrical, too perfect, too deliberate to be a product of mortal craftsmanship. Fulgrim took the blade without hesitation. The moment he lifted it, something in the air seemed to tighten. The Legion did not know what had happened, but they recognized a subtle alteration in Fulgrim's bearing. His movements carried the same perfection as before, but now there was a new quality beneath them, a sharpened intensity, a vibration almost imperceptible but unmistakable. From that moment onward, the Third Legion felt a presence accompanying them. It began with Fulgrim. The Primarch's refinement deepened into something colder, more absolute. He examined the battlefield not as a commander seeking strategy, but as an artist studying composition. Death became choreography. Victory became performance. Every maneuver seemed judged, not by efficiency but by aesthetic value. The protagonists sensed this change most keenly in the way Fulgrim observed them. His gaze no longer weighed precision alone, it measured beauty. A perfect strike delivered without elegance displeased him. A tactical maneuver lacking visual harmony earned only tepid approval. The Legion had always sought to embody refinement, but the new expectation demanded something beyond mortal discipline. Fulgrim's standards grew sharper, harsher. He moved with the confidence of one who had glimpsed a form of perfection that transcended human craft. His warriors followed him with unwavering devotion, blind to the fact that his ascent was not leading them upward, but pulling them somewhere else entirely. The blade remained at Fulgrim's side. None dared question it, but all sensed something radiating from it. It was a silent pulse, a whisper so faint that even transhuman senses perceived only fragments. Fulgrim did not speak of the weapon, yet it influenced every interaction, shaping his thoughts in ways the Legion did not see clearly until much later. The protagonist noticed the earliest signs in combat. Fulgrim engaged enemies with a fluidity that no longer resembled Astartes' doctrine. His motions carried an alien rhythm, one that blended beauty and lethality with unnerving precision. Warriors who had once studied his techniques found themselves unable to replicate them. His strikes were too smooth, too effortless, as if guided by an unseen hand. Fulgrim's expectations evolved accordingly. He sought not simply flawless execution, but transcendence. He demanded from his Legion something they could not achieve, because it was no longer rooted in humanity. The standard he pursued now belonged to something outside the Imperium's design. His sons, desperate to please him, pushed themselves deeper into obsession. The protagonist witnessed brothers practicing until their muscles trembled beneath their armor. Others sought ways to enhance their reflexes beyond regulation tolerances. Some experimented with stimulants meant to heighten focus. None spoke of these changes, but all felt a rising urgency, a fear that if they did not adapt quickly, they would fall behind the Primarchs they revered. Fulgrim did not seem to notice their struggle. He continued his ascent, unaware that the foundation beneath him had begun to crack. As campaigns continued, the Legion's elegance sharpened into something brittle. Their precision became performance. Their discipline became fixation. The sense of unity they once held began to dissolve as each warrior pursued perfection through increasingly desperate means. The Lair blade had not corrupted the Legion, not yet, but it had opened a door. Through it, Fulgrim saw a vision of perfection twisted by alien influence. He believed the beauty he perceived was an evolution of his ideals. He believed he was guiding his Legion toward a higher form of existence. His warriors followed blindly, driven not by corruption, but by devotion. The protagonist understood none of this fully. He knew only that something had changed in Fulgrim, something subtle but unmistakable. He sensed that their path, once a climb toward excellence, had begun turning into a descent masked as ascension. Fulgrim carried the blade everywhere. It never left his grasp during reflection or strategy. It remained beside him during rest periods. It gleamed during training sessions like a shard of some impossible dream. The Legion's eyes were drawn to it, despite their misgivings. The blade seemed to pulse softly, drawing attention the way a flame draws a moth. And slowly, inevitably, the Third Legion began adjusting themselves around its presence. They did not yet understand that the blade had become the new standard, the unseen measure by which their Primarch judged beauty, precision, and purpose. They did not yet understand that Fulgrim's pursuit of perfection had taken its first step away from sanity. They saw only that they must follow, and follow they did. The changes within the Legion unfolded quietly at first, carried on currents of influence too subtle for most to recognize, but too persistent to ignore. After the Leia campaign, Fulgrim reorganized training regimens and operational standards with an intensity that felt unfamiliar, even to warriors accustomed to his pursuit of excellence. The new routines required an almost punishing refinement, a level of precision beyond anything the Legion had previously attempted. The protagonist noticed the shift immediately. Where Fulgrim once evaluated performance according to effectiveness, he now emphasized form above all else. Movements that killed efficiently were corrected if they lacked elegance. Maneuvers that struck perfectly were dismissed if they appeared inelegant in execution. Warriors found themselves repeating actions endlessly, adjusting their stances by degrees so small they bordered on absurdity. Under Fulgrim's eye, every gesture became a performance. The blade remained at the Primarch's side during these sessions. Its presence shaped the Legion in ways no one spoke of. The weapon seemed to observe, or at least to influence observation, imposing a distant standard visible only to Fulgrim. He demonstrated techniques with a fluid grace no longer rooted in the teachings of the Emperor or the doctrines of the Great Crusade. The warriors who watched him felt admiration mixed with unease. They could see perfection, but they could not understand it. Training sessions grew harsher as weeks passed. Fulgrim pushed his sons beyond limits normally reserved for battle. The injuries increased. Warriors fractured bones attempting to replicate motions that seemed effortless when demonstrated by their Primarch. Others collapsed during drills structured around maintaining immaculate form while under physical strain severe enough to blur vision and distort balance. The apothecaries worked tirelessly to stabilize those who faltered, though few dared speak of the growing toll. The Legion did not complain. The Emperor's children had always embraced challenge, and pain meant little to them if it led to improvement. But the improvements they achieved no longer felt organic. Each warrior evolved in a direction subtly misaligned with their nature, shaped by an ideal that belonged to neither humanity nor Astartes' tradition. The protagonist began noting patterns among his brothers. Their movements grew more fluid, more ornamented, almost ritualistic. Their armor bore new engravings, intricate designs carved during rest cycles by hands restless for expression. Weapons were polished beyond necessity. Even ceremonial displays became exaggerated, as if every gesture required embellishment to satisfy a hunger none could name. Groups that once trained together with unity now drifted into small circles, each trying to outdo the others in refinement. Perfection became a competition. It created tensions that had not existed before. Subtle rivalries emerged. Warriors who once fought side by side with unshakable trust began questioning one another's form, execution, and artistic value. The protagonist observed these fractures with unease, yet did not fully grasp their significance. He attributed them to the natural evolution of a legion striving toward higher standards. He understood that only later he would look back and recognize those moments as the first signs of decay, the points where comradeship slowly gave way to obsession. Fulgrim continued to ascend into his newfound ideal. As his standard changed, his priorities shifted as well. He began modifying battle plans, not for tactical advantage, but for opportunities to display the Legion's aesthetic superiority. Engagement strategies emphasized symmetry. Assault formations aligned according to visual balance. Even the execution of objectives required a degree of flourish that often slowed operations unnecessarily. Yet despite the inefficiencies, the results remained effective. The Emperor's children still performed with brilliance on the battlefield, striking faster, moving more fluidly, eliminating threats with a grace that bordered on artistry. Their reputation grew, though whispers within the Imperium suggested their methods were becoming unsettling. The Legion ignored such murmurs. Praise from Fulgrim mattered more than approval from other legions. The protagonist noticed something else taking shape, an emerging emotional volatility among the warriors. Success brought euphoria so intense it verged on intoxication. Failure produced shame sharp enough to leave warriors restless for days. The desire to impress Fulgrim began overshadowing the desire to serve the Imperium. Each warrior sought recognition, even if it meant pushing beyond safe thresholds or making reckless decisions in battle. Fulgrim encouraged this ambition without realizing the consequences. His admiration for warriors who demonstrated extraordinary grace inspired others to force their bodies beyond natural limits. Some modified their armor for sleeker profiles at the expense of protection. Others altered their combat styles to incorporate unnecessary flourishes, increasing risk in exchange for fleeting moments of approval. The protagonist maintained discipline longer than most, clinging to the old doctrines, but even he felt the pull of Fulgrim's new vision. It became impossible not to. When the Primarch's gaze passed over him during training, he felt compelled to refine his stance, to elevate his movements, to become something closer to the ideal Fulgrim now chased with unrestrained fervor. The blade seemed to strengthen its hold with each passing day. Its presence resonated through Fulgrim's decisions, shaping his thoughts and expectations. The Primarch's earlier clarity, once sharp and balanced, now carried a faint distortion. His judgment skewed toward aesthetics in ways that compromised practicality. He no longer sought to master the battlefield, he sought to beautify it. This influence spread outward, touching every warrior in the Legion. The Emperor's children began expecting perfection not only from themselves, but from one another. Criticism replaced camaraderie. Praise became rare and precious. Pride, once a source of motivation, began to transform into vanity. Astartes, who had once valued purity and discipline, now valued the admiration of their peers and, above all, their Primarch. During quiet moments, the protagonist noticed how his thoughts had changed. He evaluated his own movements with hyper-awareness, replaying them mentally to identify flaws invisible to anyone else. He cleaned his armor multiple times per day, not because it was required, but because any imperfection felt unacceptable. The desire to perfect even trivial motions grew stronger with each passing cycle. Sleep became difficult. Thoughts spun constantly around the same axis: how to move more gracefully, how to strike more beautifully, how to embody the ideal Fulgrim seemed to see reflected in the blade. Even as he sensed that this fixation was unnatural, he could not dispel it. He would later understand that this was the true beginning of the Legion's transformation. It was not corruption from without, but distortion from within, a shift in values, a redirection of purpose, a hunger disguised as discipline. The protagonist saw Fulgrim holding the blade more often during strategic reviews, its surface shimmering with colors that shifted too slowly for the eye to track. He sensed that whatever standard the Primarch now followed was no longer rooted in mortal craft, but in something deeper, something alien. The Legion continued training, continued refining, continued chasing a perfection they could not define. They pushed themselves further into obsession, unaware that the path they traveled did not lead upward. It led downward, beautifully and irrevocably. The internal shift within the Legion deepened as its warriors pursued their ever-changing ideal of perfection. What began as disciplined refinement gradually evolved into restless fixation. The Emperor's children reshaped themselves according to standards no longer rooted in doctrine or practicality, but in sensations drawn from an unseen, growing influence that touched every warrior without revealing its origin. The protagonist observed this progression in small but persistent details. Warriors who once took pride in precision now sought something beyond precision. Movements became fluid to the point of instability, as though each gesture required an element of flourish regardless of tactical purpose. Armor modifications increased, with warriors adjusting their plating to accommodate unnecessary articulation or to expose portions of the body for improved mobility or aesthetic effect, despite the obvious risk. The apothecaries documented an increase in injuries unrelated to combat. muscles strained from overstretching, tendons torn from exaggerated techniques, nerves damaged by repeated attempts to control micro-movements that had no battlefield relevance. The medical officers treated the wounds efficiently, yet even they noticed an undercurrent of change in their patients. Warriors no longer cared about pain unless it impaired their ability to refine their form. Injuries became obstacles not to survival but to artistic progression. Fulgrim intensified these tendencies through the near-constant demonstrations he conducted. The blade he carried influenced each motion he made, transforming familiar forms into sweeping arcs that radiated unnatural elegance. The Legion watched and attempted to emulate him, though none could reproduce the unsettling fluidity that had begun shaping his movements. The protagonist noticed that the more time Fulgrim spent with the blade in hand, the more distorted his expectations became. He pushed his sons toward standards that did not align with their physiology, demanding fluidity where strength was required and grace where stability was essential. The Legion followed without hesitation. Their admiration for their Primarch eclipsed any lingering adherence to the Emperor's doctrines. They saw the shift as evolution, a rare privilege reserved for those worthy of the title Emperor's Children. The protagonist, despite his unease, found himself influenced by the same current. He refined his stance during rest cycles, adjusted his gait unconsciously, and examined his shadow for inconsistencies. These changes crept upon him subtly, too slowly to recognize in the moment, yet their cumulative effect altered his entire sense of self. A notable transformation occurred in the psychological atmosphere of the Legion. Emotions intensified beyond their usual boundaries. Warriors who achieved even small improvements experienced elation so potent it bordered on intoxication. Failures created despondency deeper than battle-born shame. These amplified reactions influenced the entire structure of the Legion. Training sessions became arenas of suppressed volatility. Minor mistakes sparked tension that simmered beneath the surface. Warriors began striving not just for excellence but for validation, chasing Fulgrim's approval with a fervor that made discipline increasingly fragile. The pursuit of sensation emerged gradually. The Legion's enhanced physiology, once controlled by rigid discipline, became a vessel for experiences they had never fully explored. The desire for refinement manifested as a desire for heightened awareness. Warriors described training sessions as vivid, almost intoxicating experiences. They reported perceiving details with exaggerated clarity, sensations of armor movement, blade vibration, or airflow around the body. These heightened perceptions created a hunger for more intense stimuli, encouraging ever greater risk and experimentation. Chemical stimulants designed for battlefield endurance were repurposed by some to heighten sensory acuity during training. Apothecaries noted rapid increases in dosage requests, though few questioned the motive. The Legion had always pushed themselves physically, and these requests appeared to be logical extensions of their evolving standards. Only later would it become clear that these pursuits were not natural. They were guided by an external influence woven into every sensation. Fulgrim introduced new combat drills, emphasizing auditory cues, rhythm, and coordinated motion. The drills resembled choreography rather than battle formations, requiring warriors to synchronize their actions to patterns of sound. These patterns grew increasingly complex, pushing the Legion to focus not only on movement, but on harmony. The protagonist noticed that the sounds themselves carried an unusual resonance. They seemed to vibrate through the armor, touching nerves in ways he could not fully describe. The emotional responses the sounds triggered felt disproportionate, calming at times, exhilarating at others. The blade played a central role in these sessions. Its presence altered the acoustics of the training halls, subtly altering the timbre of every sound. Warriors trained for hours under its influence, emerging from the sessions with heightened senses and lingering sensations they struggled to articulate. The protagonist experienced moments when the world seemed unnaturally vivid, colors too bright, balance too sharp, motion too fluid. He dismissed these sensations as fatigue or overstimulation, unaware that they signaled deepening corruption. Beyond the training halls, personal interactions between warriors shifted as well. Conversations grew competitive, each warrior proclaiming his refinement or recounting sensations that others had yet to experience. Pride became a commodity traded among them, stripped of its original purpose. Instead of strengthening unity, it fostered rivalry. Warriors began forming small groups based on shared interpretations of Fulgrim's teachings, each group claiming unique insight into the evolving nature of perfection. The protagonist felt torn between these emerging circles, drawn to aspects of their pursuits, yet wary of the obsession that fueled them. He witnessed brothers modifying weapons, not for effectiveness, but for the tactile experience they offered. Some polished their armor repeatedly to feel the vibration of metal under their gauntlets. Others spent hours adjusting helmet optics to amplify or distort visual stimulus. These activities no longer resembled preparation for war. They resembled ritualistic attempts to heighten experience. Fulgrim encouraged experimentation without recognizing the extent of the Legion's descent. He praised innovation and celebrated displays of mastery that bore increasingly abstract qualities. His approval validated every new extremity, pushing the Legion further into behaviors that bordered on self-destructive. The protagonist felt admiration mixed with unease as he watched Fulgrim demonstrate techniques no longer aligned with human physiology, movements twisted beyond functional range, spins extended beyond tactical necessity. The Primarch's body seemed to obey principles not taught in any Astartes discipline. A new standard of performance emerged, a form of expression shaped by sensation rather than strategy. The Legion refined their bodies to serve this ideal, conditioning themselves to respond to sensory stimuli in ways previously trained out of them. They sought to heighten every detail, every sound, every touch, every motion. Obsession replaced discipline, sensation replaced purpose. The protagonist began to understand something fundamental was wrong. His memories of earlier campaigns felt distant, almost muted compared to the vivid experiences of the present. The values that once guided him felt hollow. His focus had shifted toward chasing sensations he could not define. He felt compelled to perfect motions that no longer connected to battlefield logic. And yet he continued, not fully understanding why. The influence shaping him had become part of his identity, woven subtly into his senses, his ambitions, and his perceptions. The corruption did not feel like corruption. It felt like evolution. This was how the Emperor's children changed, not through sudden revelation, but through incremental distortion. Layer by layer, the pursuit of perfection transformed into something unrecognizable, and none of them realized how far they had drifted. Not yet. The next major campaign assigned to the Emperor's children arrived at a moment when the Legion's internal transformation had grown pronounced enough to manifest in ways visible during combat. Their deployment was meant to serve as another demonstration of their discipline and capability, reinforcing the Imperium's trust in their efficiency. Instead, it became the turning point where their pursuit of perfection visibly crossed into something else entirely. The protagonist remembered the initial phase of the operation as straightforward. The target world held entrenched resistance, requiring clean, coordinated assaults from multiple fronts. The Emperor's children were placed at the vanguard due to their reputation for precision strikes. Fulgrim, newly invigorated by the ideals that consumed him, treated the mission as an opportunity to showcase the Legion's evolution. His instructions prior to deployment emphasized elegance of formation and fluidity of movement, standards that had nothing to do with the strategic demands of the battlefield. When the assault began, the divergence between the Legion's former doctrine and their new behavior became immediately apparent. Warriors moved with a kind of exaggerated finesse that verged on performance. Instead of using cover naturally, they transitioned with sweeping steps designed to maintain visual symmetry. Their weapons were held in postures that prioritized form over stability. Their armor, modified to accommodate their altered techniques, shifted with strangely articulated grace across the battlefield. From a distance, the Emperor's children looked flawless. Their lines advanced with near-synchronized motion, their formations balancing aesthetic cohesion with tactical intent. But the protagonist, positioned among the front ranks, saw the flaws that accompanied this elegance. Warriors paused mid-stride to adjust their posture. Others lingered at vantage points too long, waiting for the perfect moment to strike rather than exploiting the immediate opportunity. Perfection slowed them, pulling them out of rhythm with the battlefield's natural flow. The enemy responded with greater aggression than anticipated. Their defensive lines adapted quickly, exploiting these momentary lapses. The protagonist witnessed several brothers struck down because they hesitated to maintain form under fire. Yet instead of correcting these errors, the Legion intensified its commitment to elegance, interpreting heightened resistance as an opportunity to refine their movements further. The battle, once a matter of survival and skill, became a demonstration of curated violence. Fulgrim led from the front, wielding the blade that had become synonymous with his new identity. His movements transcended anything the Legion had seen before. He cut through enemy formations with fluid arcs of motion that defied conventional physiology. The protagonist struggled to comprehend how Fulgrim's body maintained such unnatural flexibility. Each strike produced a ripple of sensation across the battlefield. Warriors near him felt a surge of exhilaration, moving with greater fluidity, as if responding to an emotional resonance emitted from the Primarch's actions. These sensations spread through the Legion like a pulse of energy. The protagonist felt them as well, moments where clarity sharpened unnaturally, where his senses heightened beyond the standard thresholds of Astartes' perception. He noticed minute shifts in pressure, microscopic vibrations of air, and variations in the pitch of clashing metal. Every detail seemed enhanced, sharpened to a level that made it difficult to focus on the broader flow of combat. Some warriors embraced this shift with uncontrolled zeal. They began adjusting their combat rhythm to sync with the sensations, allowing them to dictate pacing instead of adapting to the enemy. Their actions grew unpredictable, marked by sudden flares of intensity followed by moments of indulgent slowness. They ignored tactical calls from captains and sergeants, guided instead by instinctive pursuit of sensations they could not fully articulate. The battlefield became divided into two rhythms, the natural rhythm of war and the unnatural rhythm the Legion generated. These rhythms collided, coordination faltered. Commands issued by officers were disrupted by warriors following their own impulses. Units broke formation to chase fleeting sensations. Others lingered in place to savor moments of heightened clarity. The protagonist fought to stay within discipline, but even he felt the pull of these new stimuli, influencing his movements in subtle but undeniable ways. Despite these fractures, the Emperor's children remained effective. Their reflexes, enhanced by the unnatural sensations coursing through them, allowed for rapid strikes and devastating assaults. Their bodies moved with a fluidity that confused enemy lines. Their attacks came in unpredictable patterns, overwhelming defenders who could not anticipate the shape or timing of their movements. The battle moved inexorably in their favor, but the victory felt distorted, shaped by impulses rather than clarity of purpose. As the fighting pressed toward the heart of the enemy defenses, the protagonist noticed growing volatility among his brothers. Some warriors displayed moments of reckless aggression, pushing themselves deeper into enemy lines without coordination. Their movements became erratic, driven not by tactical necessity, but by the desire to prolong sensations that accompanied each kill. Others became entranced by the battlefield itself, moving as though performing a ritualized dance, oblivious to the danger around them. Fulgrim encouraged their momentum, unaware of, or perhaps indifferent to the rising instability. Under his guidance, the Legion pushed forward with renewed fervor. The blade in his hand pulsed with subtle shifts of color, reacting to the intensity of the battle. The protagonist could feel its influence radiating outward. It deepened the sensations, pushing the warriors into states of heightened immersion. Each moment felt constructed, shaped by a force that sought not victory, but experience. This influence reached its peak during the final push toward the enemy command center. The Emperor's children broke through outer defenses, with a blend of precision and uncontrolled frenzy. The protagonist found himself navigating a sea of sensations. Every sound, movement, and strike felt amplified. His muscles responded automatically, but his mind struggled to maintain clarity. He sensed how close he stood to losing himself within the same current that consumed others. The Legion overwhelmed the defenders in a manner that felt less like conquest and more like performance. Deaths were delivered with crafted elegance. Movements aligned in rhythmic patterns, unintentional yet unmistakable. The battlefield resembled a stage in which violence served as expression. When the command center fell and the resistance collapsed, the Emperor's children stood victorious, yet victory offered no satisfaction, only an incomplete sensation that demanded escalation. Fulgrim surveyed the aftermath with pride, unaware of the fracture beneath the surface. The Legion stood divided, not by open conflict, but by divergent priorities, some still chasing the essence of the Emperor's ideals, others pursuing the intoxicating sensations that defined their new identity. The protagonist understood the implications long before any words were spoken. The battle had revealed something undeniable. The transformation of the Emperor's children was no longer subtle. It was no longer slow. It had reached a stage where the Legion could not return to who they once were. The battlefield had become the mirror reflecting their descent, and what they witnessed in that reflection was not perfection. It was corruption disguised as beauty. The aftermath of the campaign revealed the true extent of the Legion's transformation. Victory should have brought stability, a chance for the Emperor's children to return to their disciplined routines and refine lessons learned. Instead, the days that followed exposed fractures forming beneath the surface, fractures too fine to see at first, yet too deep to mend once noticed. The Legion gathered aboard their vessels to process the losses and categorize battlefield results. Casualty reports arrived with unexpected irregularities. Warriors who should have survived routine injuries succumbed due to reckless modifications to their armor or enhancements that amplified sensation rather than protected life. The apothecaries recorded unusual cases where warriors ignored pain indicators or pushed their bodies far beyond sustainable limits. These deaths were not attributed to enemy fire, but to the Legion's own compulsion to exceed natural thresholds. The protagonist monitored these reports with growing unease. Each name represented a warrior once known to him, someone who had served with discipline and clarity before the gradual shift toward indulgence took hold. The patterns in the data formed a clear picture. Their pursuit of perfection had caused more casualties than the enemy. Yet this reality did not slow the Legion's descent. Instead, many viewed the losses as necessary sacrifices in the refinement of their evolving identity. Fulgrim responded to the reports, not with caution, but with renewed ambition. Instead of curbing the Legion's extremes, he intensified them. He introduced new training regimens, emphasizing heightened sensory awareness and deeper emotional connection to combat. Warriors practiced movements that required pushing their bodies to extremes, conditioning themselves to override natural limitations. Fulgrim portrayed this evolution as essential progress, a step toward realizing the Legion's true potential. During these sessions, the blade remained at his side. Its influence deepened. Warriors near the Primarch felt its presence as a subtle pressure on their senses, heightening their reactions to every motion. The protagonist felt its pull each time he approached Fulgrim, recognizing the familiar surge of unnatural clarity. The sensations that once seemed minor now dominated his perception. Each training cycle ended with him struggling to regain balance, his body craving the distorted exhilaration the blade emitted. The Legion's culture shifted dramatically as these influences grew stronger. Traditional hierarchies weakened. Instead of following chain of command strictly, warriors gravitated toward individuals who embodied the new ideal with the greatest intensity. Influence became tied to the ability to provoke awe through performance, rather than proven leadership. Groups formed around these individuals, each interpreting Fulgrim's standards through their own distorted lens. One group focused on physical refinement, pushing themselves to maintain impossible postures or perform intricate maneuvers without rest. Another group pursued auditory stimulation, experimenting with the rhythmic clashing of weapons and the resonance of armor plates. A third group delved into sensory enhancements, modifying pain suppressors and neural pathways to amplify stimuli. These factions did not oppose one another openly, but their pursuits pulled the Legion in conflicting directions. The protagonist found himself drawn into the sensory enhancement faction, not by choice, but by the escalating impulses within his own body. Sensations that once felt subtle now dominated his focus. He could no longer ignore them. The hum of ship engines vibrated through his bones. The shift of armor plates across his shoulders produced waves of awareness difficult to control. He sought ways to manage these overwhelming sensations, only to realize his brothers were doing the same. Apothecaries reported surges in requests for neural calibrations. Armorers received instructions to modify plating thickness or articulation for greater tactile response. The protagonist noticed that these adjustments were no longer intended to improve combat performance. They sought to enhance experience and ambition that would have seemed absurd in earlier days. As weeks passed, the Legion became restless. Their bodies were conditioned for extremes. Their perceptions were heightened beyond natural thresholds. The absence of battle frustrated them. They no longer trained for efficiency or discipline. They trained for the sensations they craved, pushing drills into frenzied repetitions that bordered on self-destruction. The protagonist observed his brothers spiraling deeper into obsession. Warriors spent hours perfecting sequences that served no tactical purpose. Others repeated individual motions until muscles tore and required apothecary intervention. Some began modifying their weapons into forms that produced distinct vibrations, prioritizing sensory stimulation over lethality. Fulgrim encouraged this fervor without realizing its consequences. He saw their ambition as evidence of devotion. He viewed their willingness to endure pain and exhaustion as a mark of loyalty. He interpreted their volatility as passion rather than instability. His vision for the Legion had become inseparable from the influence whispering through the blade in his hand. During strategic meetings, the Primarch proposed new forms of warfare shaped by aesthetic philosophy. He outlined concepts for formations, emphasizing symmetry, rhythm, and synchronized movement. He suggested adapting weapon patterns to produce distinctive sounds, believing this would create psychological effects upon enemies. These ideas were met with enthusiasm by many, but the protagonist recognized their dangerous divergence from the Emperor's doctrines. He saw the cost of their transformation clearly during a sparring rotation designed to evaluate combat readiness. Warriors paired off in controlled environments to simulate battlefield conditions. The protagonist faced a brother known for his impeccable balance and precision. What should have been a disciplined exchange turned into an eruptive display of uncontrolled aggression driven by the pursuit of sensation. The opposing warrior extended his movements beyond safe limits, ignoring defensive openings to focus on the exhilaration of each strike. His rhythms became erratic, undermining the measured patterns the drill demanded. The protagonist struggled to maintain composure under the surge of sensations flooding his senses. Each clash of blades resonated through his arms and chest with unnatural intensity. He felt disoriented by the fluctuations in sound and the shifting vibrations. When the drill concluded, both warriors stood on the brink of collapse, their bodies trembling with overstimulation. Apothecaries intervened, noting severe neural stress in both. Incidents like this became common across the Legion. Training rooms required reinforcement due to the intensity of their movements. Medical stations overflowed with warriors recovering from sensory overload. Commanders struggled to maintain discipline. The once proud structure of the Emperor's children had become a labyrinth of competing impulses and indulgences, their priorities shaped by craving rather than purpose. Fulgrim's growing detachment from traditional values only accelerated this spiral. He spent hours alone with the blade, its influence strengthening with each passing day. When he returned to his sons, he radiated an intensity that emboldened their obsessions. The protagonist sensed a deepening dissonance within the Primarch, though he could not yet articulate the nature of this shift. Fulgrim seemed to exist partially beyond the physical realm, shaped by a standard neither mortal nor divine. The Legion reached a tipping point as they prepared for their next deployment. The warriors who once defined themselves by adherence to purity and discipline now defined themselves by extremes. They no longer sought perfection for the Emperor, they sought it for sensation alone. The protagonist realized that the Legion's identity had fractured beyond repair. Their old doctrines survived only in memory. Their new values were rooted in impulses they could no longer control. And beneath it all, one truth had become undeniable. The pursuit of perfection had broken them. The next campaign assigned to the Emperor's children became the moment where the Legion's transformation, long hidden beneath layers of discipline and ritual, fully emerged into the open. No amount of ceremony, training, or doctrine could conceal what they had become. Their descent, once subtle and gradual, now shaped every aspect of their behavior, every action they carried out on the battlefield, and every sensation they welcomed into their bodies. The deployment began with familiar structure. Strategic formations were drawn, squads assigned, objectives detailed. On the surface, the Legion retained a semblance of the discipline they once embodied. But beneath this veneer lay volatility ready to ignite, waiting only for the first clash of combat to release itself fully. The protagonist sensed this tension the moment the Legion assembled for deployment. The warriors' movements radiated an eagerness that surpassed normal anticipation. Their bodies vibrated with restless energy. Their armor, modified for heightened sensation, emitted faint metallic hums as plates shifted against one another. Fulgrim stood at the front of the assembled lines, the blade resting at his side. The weapon's colors shifted in slow, hypnotic waves, radiating subtle pulses that resonated through the Legion. These pulses fed into the warriors' heightened senses, deepening their anticipation and blurring the line between readiness and craving. The protagonist felt the pulses in his bones, in the rhythm of his dual hearts, in the static crawling beneath his armor. Each surge intensified the sensation that battle was not a duty to be fulfilled, but an experience to be consumed. The initial stages of the assault progressed smoothly. The enemy retreated under the pressure of coordinated strikes, pushing the conflict into narrow corridors and defense lines. The Emperor's children advanced with elegance, shaped by obsession. Their movements, refined beyond practicality, flowed in rhythmic patterns reminiscent of rehearsed sequences. Yet despite the superficial beauty of their formations, the distortions beneath the surface grew increasingly visible. The first casualties on the protagonist's flank occurred not from enemy fire, but from warriors whose bodies pushed beyond sustainable limits. One collapsed from neural overload in the middle of an advance, his senses overwhelmed by the flood of stimuli. Another overextended a critical joint, fracturing bone in pursuit of a perfect strike. Apothecaries attempted to intervene, but their protocols had become outdated in the face of the Legion's evolving physiology. They stabilized the fallen, unaware that the injuries reflected deeper corruption rather than surface damage. As the assault forced the Legion into close combat, the new rhythm fully asserted itself. The Emperor's children moved in erratic patterns shaped by the sensations coursing through them. They chased impacts as though impacts were rewards, savoring the vibrations that traveled through armor and bone. They struck with unnecessary flourishes, extending motions long after the kill should have been delivered. The intensity of their responses far exceeded the threats before them. The protagonist fought amidst this chaos, his own senses dangerously heightened. Every movement he made felt amplified. Every impact resonated through his body. The familiar clarity of battle dissolved into waves of sensation that distorted his perception. He found it increasingly difficult to focus on the broader flow of combat. His body responded to stimuli before his mind could process them. His movements grew more fluid and unstable, shaped by impulses beyond conscious thought. The battlefield fractured into pockets of performance rather than cohesive formations. Warriors drifted into isolated duels, chasing sensations rather than objectives. Some lingered over defeated enemies, captivated by the aftermath of their strikes. Others pushed deeper into enemy lines without support, drawn by surges of exhilaration rather than tactical advantage. Squad cohesion deteriorated rapidly. Officers struggled to maintain control, their commands drowned beneath the Legion's growing hunger. Fulgrim moved through the battlefield like a singular, devastating force. His presence radiated intensity that shaped the Legion's behavior. The blade he wielded pulsed with unnatural energy, releasing waves of sensory distortion that fed into the warrior's impulses. The Primarch's movements had transcended the realm of Astartes' capability. His strikes curved in impossible arcs. His steps resonated with unnatural rhythm. His form blurred between motion and stillness, shaped by a grace that bent the rules of physical law. The protagonist watched Fulgrim with a mixture of awe and dread. The Primarch had become the embodiment of everything the Legion pursued, perfect, transcendent, and terrifying. Fulgrim no longer fought to fulfill objectives or protect his sons. He fought to express the ideal that consumed him, and the Legion followed this ideal blindly, sacrificing stability for the ecstasy of sensation. The turning point of the battle arrived when the enemy deployed a final defensive line, reinforced by elite units capable of challenging Astartes' strength. These warriors, disciplined and desperate, formed tight ranks that delivered coordinated fire into the Emperor's children as they advanced. Under normal circumstances, such resistance would have required tactical adaptation, but the Emperor's children had long since abandoned restraint. Instead of adjusting formation, they surged forward with reckless momentum, drawn to the intensity of the assault. Warriors leaped into the line of fire, not out of courage but out of the desire to feel the concussive force of impact. Their bodies absorbed damage they should have avoided, their armor cracking under sustained fire. Yet they continued, driven by impulses that had replaced survival instinct. The protagonist found himself caught between his fading discipline and the overwhelming sensations driving him forward. He attempted to maintain order, pushing his squad to form a cohesive pattern, but they fractured around him, each warrior drawn into their own spiral of sensation. He could only watch as brothers he had served alongside for decades lost themselves entirely, consumed by indulgence that obliterated purpose. The battle devolved into a chaos of movement and sensation. The Emperor's children overwhelmed the defenders not through coordination but through sheer, uncontrolled ferocity. The enemy ranks broke under the relentless assault, but victory did not restore clarity. Instead, it deepened the corruption. Warriors continued striking long after the defenders were neutralized, consumed by the rhythmic feedback of violence. Once the final pockets of resistance collapsed, the battlefield fell into an eerie stillness. Warriors stood amidst the bodies of their enemies, breathing heavily, armor vibrating with residual tension. Their eyes reflected exhaustion mixed with hunger, a hunger unsatisfied by the carnage around them. The protagonist sensed that something irreversible had occurred. The battle had not catalyzed their descent, it had revealed the truth of what they had already become. Fulgrim surveyed the aftermath with an expression that radiated pride. His perception of the Legion's transformation had reached a point where he could no longer distinguish between discipline and corruption. His senses, shaped by the blade's influence, interpreted their excess as refinement. The protagonist realized that the Primarch he had once followed with unwavering loyalty now embodied the very distortion he feared. In the days that followed, no effort was made to restore discipline. Warriors spoke openly about the sensations they experienced, each attempting to outdo the others with descriptions of intensity. Apothecaries reported unprecedented neural damage across multiple companies, but their warnings went unheeded. The Legion had fully embraced its new identity, shaped by impulses that no longer aligned with the Emperor's ideals. The protagonist tried to cling to his remaining sense of self, but the corruption had taken root deep within him. He felt sensations even in stillness, his body craved extremes, his mind struggled to maintain the boundaries between perception and purpose. He recognized that he stood on the edge of unraveling, caught between the warrior he once was and the creature he was becoming. And he understood, with devastating clarity, that the Legion could no longer return. Their unraveling was complete. The Legion's return to its fleet after the campaign did not bring the stability or reflection that once defined the Emperor's children. Instead, the aftermath revealed the depth of internal collapse that had taken root within every company. Where other legions returned from battle with tempered discipline and renewed clarity, the Emperor's children returned with lingering tremors of sensation that refused to fade, carrying the battlefield within their bodies long after the fighting had ended. The protagonist recognized this change immediately. The halls of the flagship vibrated with an energy that felt wrong. Warriors moved with restless intent, unable to settle into routines that had once provided grounding. Maintenance rituals were no longer carried out with calm precision, but with impatient urgency, as though each motion was an inconvenience delaying a desired experience. The familiar structure of the Legion's daily cycles fragmented under the weight of new impulses. Fulgrim withdrew into private chambers for prolonged periods, taking the blade with him. The weapon's influence, once subtle, now emanated in waves that the Legion could feel regardless of their distance from him. When Fulgrim emerged, he radiated an intensity that distorted the atmosphere of any room he entered. His presence created shifts in the senses of those around him. Colors brightened, sounds sharpened, and movement became exaggerated. Warriors experienced these sensations not as disturbances, but as enhancements, interpreting them as signs that their Primarch had ascended to a higher state. In this shifting environment, the chain of command weakened further. Captains struggled to enforce discipline among warriors who no longer valued restraint. Orders were interpreted through the lens of sensation rather than strategy. If an order aligned with a warrior's impulses, it was followed eagerly. If not, it was disregarded without hesitation. The protagonist watched officers attempt to re-establish control, only to fail against the rising tide of indulgence. The Legion was no longer bound by unity, but by shared hunger. The protagonist himself felt the pull of this hunger growing stronger. Every moment of inactivity carried an undercurrent of discomfort, a subtle pressure urging him to seek stimulation. The sensation was not pain but restlessness that clawed at his nerves. Silence felt oppressive, stillness felt unbearable. Even breathing carried exaggerated awareness, each inhale and exhale too vivid to ignore. He tried to suppress these impulses, clinging to habits from earlier days, but suppression only intensified the cravings. Apothecaries attempted to address the increasing neural instability, but their treatments focused on physical symptoms rather than the deeper corruption shaping the Legion's behavior. Neural dampeners were recalibrated, but the calibrations provided only fleeting relief. Warriors returned to their chambers briefly stabilized, only to emerge hours later more volatile than before. The protagonist witnessed this cycle repeatedly and understood that their bodies were no longer responding to standard medical principles. They were adapting to new demands that defied biological logic. As days passed, the fleet awaited new orders. The absence of immediate deployment created a vacuum that magnified the Legion's instability. Without battle to channel their impulses, the warriors turned to training halls in search of intensity. These halls, once environments of disciplined refinement, became arenas for reckless experimentation. Warriors pushed themselves through sequences far beyond safe limits, chasing sensations they could no longer distinguish from necessity. Feedback loops of overstimulation occurred frequently. Warriors collapsed from neural strain. Muscles seized under the pressure of extreme motion. Joints fractured from extended hyperflexion. The apothecaries' medical bays overflowed, but their warnings to commanders went unheard. The Legion had reached a point where consequence no longer mattered. Only experience held value. The protagonist found himself caught between two realities. The discipline he once embodied remained within him as a fading echo, but the sensations that shaped his body and perception overwhelmed his attempts to resist. He performed drills with exaggerated precision, not because they were necessary, but because the movements produced waves of satisfaction that drowned his remaining clarity. He recognized the distortion within himself, but recognition did not provide the strength to resist. It only revealed the inevitability of his transformation. Fulgrim eventually called the Legion together. The gathering was not for orders or instruction, but for a demonstration. The Primarch revealed what he had crafted during his long hours of isolation. It was a new form of expression, shaped through the blade's influence, designed to capture the essence of the sensations that consumed the Legion. The warriors watched as Fulgrim moved, his body twisting with impossible fluidity, each motion radiating a resonance that penetrated their senses. The demonstration altered the Legion permanently. Warriors felt sensations surge through them with force that shattered the last remnants of restraint. Their bodies trembled with responses beyond their control. Neural pathways, already strained from previous excess, opened further under the pressure. The protagonist felt something inside him yield, a boundary dissolving that had held since the earliest days of his indoctrination. When the demonstration ended, the Legion stood transformed, not through instruction, but through shared revelation. In the hours that followed, the fleet changed. Training intensified to dangerous extremes. Warriors modified their armor and weapons beyond recognition, shaping them according to impulses rather than logic. Some carved symbols into their armor, markings that resonated with distorted ideals of beauty. Others altered their senses through chemical enhancements, seeking constant stimulation. The apothecaries could no longer contain the scale of neural damage. Commanders lost authority entirely. The Legion belonged to sensation, to excess, and to the silent influence that had guided them for months. The protagonist observed the shift with a numbing sense of inevitability. The Legion he had served his entire life no longer existed. Its purity had dissolved into obsession. Its discipline had fragmented into indulgence. Its purpose had vanished beneath the pursuit of experiences that provided no fulfillment, only deeper cravings. He attempted one final time to anchor himself in memory. He recalled earlier campaigns defined by unity and honor. He recalled the sense of purpose he once held, but the memories felt distant, muted beneath the new sensations, dominating his senses. He understood in that moment that his connection to the past had been severed. What remained was not identity, but impulse. As the fleet prepared for its next deployment, the protagonist felt the last remnants of resistance fade. The sensation that consumed the Legion now consumed him as well. He no longer fought it. He no longer questioned it. He became part of the downward spiral that shaped the Emperor's children into something unrecognizable. The point of no return had passed long before he noticed it, and now all that remained was descent.